Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. This is a campaign postmortem on a 2 year long campaign called Romance of the Five Houses. This story I'd envisioned as having the name To Kill a Phoenix, but of course I couldn't really tell my players that at the beginning of it. We did run this on Fate, but we did move between systems a couple of times. So, anyway, let's dive in. So this game began, as a lot of campaigns do, as my attempt to do an Avatar: The Last Airbender game. I'm a part-time Tai Chi teacher, and one of the things that's part of that is using or having knowledge of the Wu Zhang, or the five element system. This is a pretty different way of thinking from the four element system. If you aren't familiar with this includes wood, water, metal, earth, and fire. So wood and metal are usually not on the list in the West. So that is a big change. If you, I, like a lot of people in my age group, saw Avatar: The Last Airbender on Fox Kids and thought, why not me too? There's certainly been a good few attempts to do this in the last couple of years. And, even predating that, I played a game called Exalted on first edition with the game designer Frev Yeti, Misha Hanman, who you should go look up. But, he ran a game for me on Exalted that was very much in the same vein as this. And I absolutely took inspiration from that too. I wanted to do something also Bronze Age, a little bit more limited. We often, in doing fantasy, would go for medieval, like metal, like iron, I guess. And I wanted something a little bit more restrained. I like the heroicism of the Bronze Age. It's more about the body, or it feels that way to me anyway. This also includes a lot of untamed spirits and hungry ghosts. Government thaumaturges were ideas that I wanted to bring into this. My big villain in this game is largely based on Musitan, but there's definitely some other DNA in there from the Scarlet Empress and some other villains too. So was the game good? Well, so I had a lot of different reactions to the game. I think mostly good. I'm very happy with how the game went. Do I see room for how the game could have gone better? Of course, but when don't we? My players had lots of good feedback. So this game was YA as heck. We got into masquerades. There was some enemies to lovers stuff. People got trapped in prison books. We overthrew the government. We killed God. We protected a young adult sibling. We had discussions about how power chains you. We had abdication of power in favor of happiness or freedom. It was a pretty fun game to play in. One of the things that's really great about YA is you get to include adult elements like woohoo without having to delve too deeply into them in the way that maybe some more adult stuff would. We can acknowledge the adult world, but we don't have to, live there. Thematically, masks were also a big thing that featured in this game. That felt very YA. This is a little bit inspired by Slay the Spire, but the masks were also sort of came to be a symbol of the spirit world, and indeed a character who was a spirit medium in this group wore a mask basically continuously. Yeah, so lots of good stuff here. Just checking my notes here. Yeah, so, two of our characters were, a cursed woman and a fragmented spirit who were inextricably bound to each other. I had to write them out of the game halfway through Season 3 because they literally had a baby. So, no game is without complications or turnover. We'll talk more about that later. But, every game has this, right? We are not writers, because in books that we write, characters don't just disappear in Act 3. It's more like TV, where, sometimes your actors get pregnant or fall off a horse on The Tonight Show. So this is the longest game I've ever run. It was 3 seasons of 8 episodes. I'm not sure what that note 3 to 4 means. That must be a typo. Anyway, but we season 1 focused on outside of the city. establishing the world in general, establishing the wild edges of the world, and establishing the way people see the capital. Season 2 focused on more in the capital and the lower and middle city power structures, religious structures, the criminal triads, that kind of thing. And Season 3 focused on the upper city, culminating in the Masquerade finale. So there's the general sense of the story we told. Episode concepts here included our exorcist spirit medium witnessing a tragic accident, but because they were so close to wild magic, and that magic was wood aspected, which is an element that includes this idea of renewal and new life, there was this idea that perhaps they could cheat death. This ended up being the most interesting, or the precipitating moment, that's the word I'm looking for this character. The resurrection worked too well, and not only was the corpse, who was one player character, filled with many ghosts. So this player was playing one body that was inhabited by many ghosts, and was sort of a chariot pulled by these ghosts, whatever they agreed to. Twitch plays having a body, if you like. But also, this would end up waking up the spirit medium's deceased sister, which would characterize that character for the rest of the game. She came to me, in fact, partway through Season 2 with an idea for a character, and it was something that I'd already sort of been trying to lay a bit of groundwork on, but, great minds think alike. Anyway, it was pretty cool, because she had the same idea. So we just went with it. So Season 2, our characters robbed a Bronze Age casino in an homage to Ocean's 11. You may remember there's this scene where they go to recruit a character named Ruben. He's sitting by a pool, and he tells them a story about what's happened to the last 3 guys who tried to rob one of these casinos and what happened to them. And I got to do my homage to that speech. One of the things I was thinking about with this game was there's this thing you hear older TV writers talking about is how many times have you written Die Hard? How many times have you written, this movie or that movie? Aliens. There's certainly in older TV, there's clear homages to these things. And so this was my attempt to do exactly that. And finally, I could have set up the slide better, I realized. But anyway, 2 heroes attended a matriarch's birthing ceremony together. One of them, the spirit medium, was to be the midwife. The other one was there nominally to help out, but actually to poison the matriarch. So what was really great about this moment is the spirit medium was the one who ended up poisoned, and paradoxically, the two ended up growing closer at the end of the episode. Perfect stuff. Good drama. I'm going to keep going on this. Just, if you don't play Fate, if you happen to speak D&D, just anytime I talk about getting a Fate point, just imagine I said inspiration point. It's the same thing. So you got that? Cool, let's keep going. So this game, I decided to take on some challenges. I think it's important to use gaming to challenge yourself, both as a player and as a GM, and you do that in different ways in both roles. I wanted to use the woozing as my approaches in Fate. Fate has the option to work with, instead of skills, we can sometimes work with a collection of attributes: clever, flashy, sneaky, etc. They're a little bit like strength, dex, con, wisdom, charisma, etc. And indeed, you probably could use those as your approaches, and I have. But I wanted to use these. This was a learning process for me, because one of the things I wanted to do was get deeper knowledge of the woozing. I've talked before, earlier in the video, about how this 5-element system is really, really different from the 4-element system that I grew up with. And one of the things that I wanted to do was, by delving in, I hope to increase my knowledge. Now, was I successful in that? Well, I'm gonna change systems a few times before the game's out, so I don't think I was, but I think it's an interesting failure, and we'll talk about why. I venture to challenge myself with these things. This is maybe the spirit of scouting in me. I think role-playing can be a really great tool for delving into topics and seeing how a mindset works. So, again, I thought by delving in, maybe I would do that. I was in the Fate Kickstarter. I've got the toolkit here on my desk. I got a signed book here, and I've been practicing martial arts for a few years worth with this bit of this worldview sort of baked into the philosophy of it. And indeed, my players had also worked with this before. So all of them, like, they were all familiar with the idea. They hadn't lived in it in the same way I hadn't lived in it. But, I thought it would be a fun challenge. What could possibly go wrong? 5 elements, they're thematic and evocative. It has the potential to be really cool. So, we'll see how that goes. We'll check in with that later. I did learn some lessons from this game. We did a lot of creative exercises. We were coming out of lockdown when we started this game. And, people were tired. You'd get together. And everybody knows this. Sometimes you get together and it's just not going to happen this week. So what I would try to do, if you at least got to the table, we would try to do a creative exercise to at least take the energy we did have and channel it into the world. This had the effect of, reminding us, keeping us connected to the game that we were playing, but also, and keeping us connected to the world. It meant, we had some really great successes in here. So, like, as an example, we had a player, I think this is the slide where I talk about this. We had a player, while we were playing The Quiet Year, who proposed that there were these blue gemstones that resembled eyes. They were like connected to the spirit world. They called them, I think, spirit eye gemstones, something like that. This player, we ended up like reincorporating the symbol of these gemstones into the character, and would inform the character right up until the end of the game, like when they became engaged at the end of the story, or towards the end of the story. It was worked into the character's pommel before that, briefly was used as a tool for espionage. Good stuff. We did a few different things for this. We did we did a quiet year for the age before our story, so we sort of imagined what a Stone Age might have looked like. The players, and we also did a Told by Starlight. This is from Ryan Kahn, from right here in London. This is a game where you make the stars, and we thought this would be a fun thing to do for making mythology. I got to play this one with him at Breakout Con a couple of years ago. I used some of the ideas from the Dresden Files RPG about building a city. I think that section of that game is really good, and for me, it was the first Fate I'd really encountered. I used D'Amato's Ultimate RPG Backstory book. It's pretty good. We did that one more online, actually. We would use that on the Discord. Because we were bi-weekly, I would try to post something bi-weekly on the off week to sort of just keep people thinking about the game. I think one of the roles of the GM is to keep players thinking about it. So much of the game is about that. It worked really well. The players basically told me what they wanted. All of the elements of this story that ended up in the finale, or many of them anyway, came from these events. And the role for me was really just to take them and combine them together. One of the things that came out of this was an inn called the Floating Lantern, a place that the characters began episode 1 in and would return to it again and again, and indeed right up until the finale and including the finale. This was a place of importance, and if you were ever to revisit the setting, it would demand including this location. So I think my point here is that I think that doing these works is pretty important, these creative works. So I thought I'd share some of this stuff with you. So one of the things that started to happen was we got a little bit of custom art, memes, if you will. I think these things starting to happen is pretty funny. One of the things that really started to happen as the game went on, a ship became pretty clear between a character named Li Fang and the Season 1 villain named Mouse. There were some songs that came out of this. Also, there was, a game of Fiasco with some Zoomer vampires that was really excellent. But also, we got more modern traditional anyway, memes. Li Fang and a Mouse are again the thing here. There is a little bit of like Li Fang being totally unaware that there are other women in the world. So I forced him into a relationship triangle with him being totally unaware of the situation. It was the only way to do it, but we got some good drama out of it. There was also some tension for me as a GM. I managed to hold on to the secret for a little while. I managed to get away for a few episodes before doing a thing where the character was masked sometimes and not masked other times, but I would try to consciously use similar. She would always show up in the same way. She'd use similar mannerisms. Eventually, we figured that out. It was good stuff. But that's not to say that there weren't memes about other characters. We had Yaoni and Mountain, the later of whom was literally like the spirit of the shattered mountain spirit of a dead age. And over time, he eventually learned how to like possess objects and manifest himself just a little bit. It's culminated in an episode where he was like routinely possessing things, and this the idea that these objects would sprout eyes became a thing. It was very Smithy from Super Mario RPG, but I don't know. I think that this was really funny. Anyway, but we got other lessons. So, I talked before about insurmountable problems with the FATE system, with my approaches, not really with the FATE system, with my approaches. I found it some interesting an unconscious bias problem here about the nature of fire. So players were never totally able to unlearn or to learn on their own how to make a die roll without me saying to them, this is what you would roll. We worked with tables at the table, like by which I mean a table of what different things you would use for different rolls. That was also not sufficient, and I think I can reduce the problem to one thing. So let me ask you this. What element do you associate with anger? It's wood, obviously, right? Wood is the thing you associate with anger. In the Wu Zing, this is true anyway. And the reason is this. Wood is associated with children. It's sort of the youthful element. And it has a balanced emotion of patience, but when that emotion becomes unbalanced, there's this idea that wood is angry. If you think of a child's temper tantrum, that's the kind of anger we're kind of talking about here. But this idea is on our culture too. Even in the West, when we see an adult acting this way, we say that they're behaving childishly when they have anger about this kind of thing, about impatience or whatever. So, but this problem that fire is associated with some different ideas was a big problem in this game. So here's a little breakdown for you. It's like much more direct. I use Celtic here. Some of this is also true about the Greek fire as well. These are just different ideas about the same idea. And I'm not saying that the Celtic fire doesn't include some of these same ideas, but they're maybe less associated. Bridget is also associated with fire in the Celtic system, who's a healing goddess. But indeed, fire is more often associated with destruction in the West. And while there is this idea that fire can be out of control in the Wu Zing, it's mostly a symbol of prosperity, and also there's this idea of anger, right? In the Celtic system, and indeed for this character, Li Fang, it made sense for him to be angry sometimes, to be uncontrolled. And, he was a great example of Celtic fire, and in ways he was also a great example of Chinese fire, of the Wu Zing style of fire. But this tension was always present at the table. And this is just one of the 5 elements, right? We are not even talking about metal here, which is not even on our radar in the West. This was something, this unconscious bias about fire is what I've been thinking about it as. There's probably better terminology, but this was a problem I was never able to surmount. We ended up moving to Primetime Adventures in Season 2. Part of that was to get away from the system. Part of that was what I wanted to train the group on, something a little bit more cinematic. We ultimately returned to Fate and just used the approaches from Fate Accelerated for the finale, and that was fine. The elements ended up phasing out of the game, so in a way, that aspect of the project was a failure, but ultimately it was okay. This next slide's about sort of an aside problem. I had a lot of turnover in this game. I talked earlier about my friends who had a baby, and wonderful, obviously. I had a breakup during this game. I had people come in, I had people leave. I'm the only person who was present both in the first episode and in the finale. Li Fang and Hamako both come in pretty early in season one rather. They arrive early in season one, but there is this kind of funny aspect of it. I also, for a while, had sort of an open door policy with regards to attendance, recognizing that people are adults, but it meant that people would come for an episode and then never return. And one of my lessons and my takeaways from that is that, when I'm allowing that, I don't know, I always assume they're going to come back. They even tell me they're going to come back. But because this was the case, I was also not really serving players that were more consistent. So, as an example, partway through season 2, I had Yusei join the group, and he's a good character, but because for the rest of the season I had 3 different characters, I believe, that either had to be written in or out, and then the next season I had 2 more that had to be written out. Sorry, 3 more that had to be written out. That ended up meaning that Yusei's character suffered because I had to both introduce plot threads and dissolve them. And at times he was attached to those plot lines. Like, one of those characters was involved in organized crime. This is nobody's fault. This is just the nature of the beast with role playing, right? This is part of what happens with campaigns. Role playing is like being a writer director of a play that's being adapted. You kind of think you know what's going to happen, but actors have problems sometimes. Actors get hurt, they get sick, they get pregnant. Life happens, and we have to adapt. But, there was a lesson there about where to place my attention. So, lesson number 3. One of my explicit goals this year for role-playing, I think I said actually was last year too, was to tell a full story from start to finish in a single night. My idea here was, if I can do this should be like a TV episode. And there's other games that have talked about this. Primetime Adventures by Matt Granville, I think his name is. He talks about this, trying to do a whole episode in one night. But I was never totally able to achieve this with his tools. Up until this game anyway. There's a little bit of you have to force the game to end. And if there's unresolved threads, you just have to go with that. Let's talk about that a little bit more, though. I think that if you end the game in a state of mid-action, it leads to a situation where sometimes, it's a big dramatic cliffhanger. That's kind of fun. It's like, Batman 66, right? What will happen to our heroes next time? But that also means that you're stuck with that group of players next time. And if somebody's sick that week, and even with that turnover thing I was talking about, you have to accommodate that some people are just not going to be there some weeks because life. You have to be able to be adaptive. And one way to be adaptive is just to make sure that if an actor's not there that week, it's not a problem. Finish your plot line. Christmas Carol, in a Christmas Carol and the spirits in it, I wanted to do it all in one night. So there were a bunch of ideas that I had to do, some streamlining I needed to do in order to get this to happen. But TV, for the most part, has a pretty strict formula. Characters start in a location, they venture out somewhere, and eventually return to a home location. The idea of home can be twisted, the idea of out can be twisted. But in essence, that is the structure we start with. And then we save our twists on that for sweeps. If nobody misses the end of the story, it's not a problem. You are reset, everybody's back at the floating lantern, and you are reset for next week if somebody misses something. I think this gives the flexibility most adults need to do role play to commit to role playing. One of the things that Primetime Adventures is great at is doing scenes, but there's this idea that you're going to plot out your arcs in advance and assign those point values, and it works up until somebody gets sick. So functionally, this meant that most week's characters would start at the floating lantern and do an establishing scene before they went out. Some of these changes culminated in something I'm starting to think of as cinematic fate, sort of inspired by cinematic unisystem. Fate's already a story game, but why not more? So, characters usually go off from the floating lantern before returning at the end of the night to compare notes. One thing that I had the characters start to do that's a switch from normal Fate is I would have them expose at each other in the opening of the episode. We often sit down and we talk about, okay, everybody, what happened last time? And we do that. It's an important step. But equally important is what your character is feeling in that moment and where they are at in their journey. So if the characters sit down and have those scenes, like in the opening of most TV episodes, where they say facts at each other that the other character, I should say, probably already knows, that's okay. Because really what we're doing is reminding the other player as an audience member and as the person who has to portray the character what your truth is. For example, we had a character, Yusei, who was involved with the criminal undertakings and the triad in the city. And, how he felt about that changed from episode to episode. So by making the character say something about an aspect that he has and making him work a little bit harder to get a fate point. So the idea here is that every time you mention an aspect, you get a fate point instead of me just giving them to you when you were fresh. It was a good change. One of a few changes that we made. And so I built this out into a couple of more moves and structure to build out an idea of cinematic fate. Haven't really decided what to do with this yet. I talked before about twisting the format. Once you have the format, you can twist it. So you have this idea of characters starting at home and going away. In one episode, the episode ended with the characters being arrested and being dragged off to jail. So the next episode, home, meant something pretty different. And at the end of the episode, when they returned home, it was more dramatic. Good stuff. Let's keep going. One of the ideas that I had to start thinking about streamlining a lot. This meant having like a really good, firm push for each of the characters when I got started. I'd been told this idea my whole GMing career. My friend Bill has told me this a million times, but I don't think I really appreciated how true it was. Dan Harmon's story circle is something I started using. I was seeing this when I was thinking about, how to approach the characters. And I think this is maybe a really interesting tool for role-playing. I've been trying to adapt this into something. There's a few ideas here that on the circle that I want to draw your attention to. We have this idea of order and chaos in the middle of the circle. And I think that this is a good pointer towards what are player responsibilities and what are GM responsibilities. I think that the order mostly represents player responsibilities and chaos mostly represents GM responsibilities, and I think this hints towards moves that you have. You'll note also that everything across the circle from each other is mirrored. So you and find are mirrored, need and take are mirrored, go and return are mirrored. The idea essentially is to get every character, or as many of them as possible, through the whole circle every week. And if you do, the characters change naturally. This often meant I had to show up with a real good idea of what the shove would be to get them out the door. But with a little bit of practice, that worked. This also meant a lot of reminding the audience, I talked before about the players versus the characters. The players know what's going on in the story. The audience doesn't necessarily remember from week to week, so it helps with that. So yeah, I would come to the table with one new truth the characters needed to learn every week. Or I'd try to anyway. I got better at it as we went, and as it became clearer who these characters were. And I feel like, especially for the characters who were present in Season 1, we got there. Is there improvements I could have made? Sure, but a lot of that's in retrospect. We had a few different things happen. I had my Phoenix Empress, the big bad, who threatens the little bad. And I needed to find ways to have NPC on NPC dialogue This is a problem people have been dealing with in role-playing for a long time. I can think of it. There's a scene in Dragonlance, the old campaign, where there's a group of dwarven lords who have a speech at each other for a long time. And that's not interesting for the most part, having an NPC do that. So it needs to be quick, it needed to be crisp. But I needed to, I realized after a scene with Yusei where I had a triad member and somebody higher up than him talking to each other, and they were supposed to be. I ran a scene where I tried to do dialogue between Yusei's boss, who was in the triad, and also this bookkeeper figure who represented the triad in the in the upper city. I didn't feel like the scene went super well, so, and part of that was to do with I'm switching between two NPCs, they're both trying to threaten each other. It's very hard to keep everything straight in your head. So I ended up taking an idea from my old friend Bill from the Shake, Rattle, and Roleplay podcast, and I ended up scripting scenes. This allowed me to focus my words for maximum impact. Being sort of mean on screen doesn't really come naturally to me, so I need to think about it in advance. And also, it's more impactful when you think about your words. And also, this had some cold open opportunities where I would give the players a good shove in the very first episode, give them something to react to go. Something Bill did too. And something that I think I was maybe not as patient with him when he was experimenting with him as I hope my players were with me. I tried to learn from his example. So eventually, the cold open, I didn't do a lot of this, but the cold opens were certainly there and present, and we did a few of them. I think they worked really well, but I did get towards the end. It's 3 seasons in. I had a problem. I understood the story way better than the players. The characters understand the story too, but because the players take 2 weeks between every session, even with creative exercises, I had a problem. I had a whole bunch of canon. There's a little bit of mystery element in this story because it's YA. Where did the Phoenix Empress come from? What exactly is her nature? What exactly was the deal with the mountain? What exactly was the deal with the deceased giant world tree, etc., etc.? And I needed a moment where the characters tied it all together. The players are the ones who are supposed to do that, but of course the players are not really well equipped to do that. It's the characters who are the ones with knowledge. So I scripted a scene where the characters talk to each other and just put it all together. I tried to be really careful with some things about this, like trying to characterization. Also tried to break it up so it wasn't just exposition. I was pretty happy with how this came together. In a way, it's a sort of memento of the story because each player came away with a book that is effectively a few pages that is effectively the plot line summarized up until they begin the finale. So I'm pretty happy with that. It was 6 pages long. I do think it was probably a little bit long. I couldn't figure out how to make it shorter though. So maybe it's just what it is. So Weiss Hickman, mostly Templeton though. Thank you. I think that was a good technique. So that was all lesson 3, doing a whole episode in one night. It takes a lot of pushing to get it done. A lot of work, both in advance, and then you have to be pretty directed at the table. Having some notes, some even direct quotes really does help. I think the summary I was talking about at the end, not necessarily part of this, but I do think that if we tried to puzzle through it at the table, it probably would have taken a whole night. Part of this is about just saving your focus and attention so that in the limited time you have at the table, you can maximize your impact. So, I did all that. I got to the end of the story, we got to endings. So I did the endings in a few different stages. I started with the immediate aftermath, and then I worked out to 10 years later. I like long endings in shows, and I like a show that has a bunch of epilogue scenes. You've usually spent a lot of time with these characters, and you want to know how their life goes. So I like to answer that. And also I had this thought that, much like Avatar, maybe we would revisit this setting in a few months to maybe a year or something like that. And if we were to do that, I wonder what would change. Having a long aftermath gives us hints about that. So I think an easy character to point to here, it's also the one I have notes for while I'm recording this, is Hamako. So this was our spirit medium. In the immediate aftermath of the fight, she had exorcised a ghost from herself at long last. A ghost that had been with her since the first episode that she'd come to play in, and before that. And she became a normal person, the thing that she wanted the whole time. Her and her sister, over the course of 1 year, 5 years, her sister married, her sister had children, her sister eventually, 10 years later, had a life. The dead sister became the one who cherished and lived, cherished life and lived, and the dead sister cherished life too, but also her thoughts were for the dead, the one who had always been alive. Her thoughts were for the dead, and so the two of them create a wonderful pair. Wonderful stuff. A little story contained in just 10 years of little scenelets. Great stuff. Not a thing that could have happened without this structure. I think this is pretty good. You could, of course, change the years out. But, this lets you tell a little story in 3 scenes. The scenelet after that just establishes what just happened in your immediate aftermath, and going forward from there. We're almost done here. I only have 2 more slides. So what's next? I have story structures for 8 different episodes for 3 seasons. I have this idea to maybe put it into a novel, maybe repackage it as like a Paco RPG. I mentioned teaching martial arts. I think it could be fun to do that. Or maybe do some kind of radio play with it. Again, I have episode structures and I have a group of talented friends. I think that could be a fun thing to do. We'll see what actually happens. These are just ideas I'm throwing up in the air because I guess I'm just blue sky. This is the second last slide. In researching sociology, it's also a course, I guess it's a course I'm taking right now. I've come across this idea of role conflict that I think is something that is fundamental to the way aspects are structured, that I think explains that, well, if you have gotten this far in the video, you maybe have worked with Fate enough to know, aspects are one of the things that players struggle with most in Fate when they get in the door. If you Google like how to write a good aspect, you'll get lots of different answers. There's not really a clear structure. I think that's the reason for that is because we're actually not actually sure what we're trying to communicate. We're still figuring that out. I think I have an answer. And, well, at least I think I have a good answer. Perhaps it's just one more answer, but we'll see. If you're interested in that, let me know. This is already 37 minutes long, so I want to wind this up. So thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you for watching this late in the video. Thank you for being part of this postmortem with me. And, I think it's really good to do these things, to look back at a game that you've done and see what you can learn from it. I've done this before. I'm going to link a couple of other videos here where I've done this in podcasts before with some friends. One with Monster Hearts and another with a game called Cold City. These are kind of like fun save points. When you finish a game, you're at your apex of skill with that game system. And it's only going to go down from there. I've gone back and listened to my recordings from old games like this when I've wanted to record something, play something again. Listen to that Monster Hearts episode when I wanted to run Monster Hearts. It's a good thing to do. So maybe consider doing this for you too. It'll create some discussion. We can share ideas between tables. So thank you for your kind attention. Remember, the moonlight is a messenger of love. Have a great day.